Talking about internalizing innovation and making it part of your organizational DNA so you can compete and thrive in a business environment of accelerating, fast-paced transformation, to say the least. It's almost impossible to keep up. But who better to talk about that than Rowan Gibson? He's been called Mr. Innovation, the Innovation Grandmaster, and my favorite, an Innovation Management Ninja. We're going to have you explain what a management ninja is, particularly around innovation. He's also president of Imagination Bridge, which is a global innovation consulting firm, and he co-founded InnovationExcellence.com, the world's most popular innovation website. He's a strategic advisor to a long list of Fortune 50 companies all over the world. So let's get some of that knowledge for ourselves. Please welcome, and I'm honored to introduce Rowan Gibson.
Thank you, Stacy. Thanks so much. Well, good morning, everybody. That is the best introduction I have ever written. So, very proud to listen to those words. Now we're going to live up to it. So, I hear you've had a wonderful conference so far, and I'm incredibly excited to be with you. I get to do these things all around the world. It's been 62 countries in just the last 5 years alone. And I'm always honored to address a room full of leaders from any industry. Today is absolutely no exception. You're in an industry that's going through a lot of transformation and that still needs to go through a lot of transformation. So we're going to talk together about how we can win in the transformation economy. I've noticed that, oh, here you go. My slides are up on the screen. Beautiful. So how are we going to win in the transformation economy? Well, one thing, as Stacy just mentioned, is that, transformation doesn't happen on its own. Right? It requires intervention. If you want somebody or you want an organization to change, it requires some form of intervention. So we're going to talk about what we can do. Remember, the subtitle of this whole event is the power of how. So how are we going to bring about digital transformation across our organizations? I'd like to start with a statement that was made by a colleague of mine in the whole strategy and innovation business, a gentleman by the name of Professor Gary Hamel. So some of you may know Gary Hamel. A while back, Gary made this incredibly powerful statement. He said, out there in some garage is an entrepreneur who's forging a bullet with your company's name on it. Does that feel sort of familiar in terms of what's going on in the world around us? I get to work with and consult for a whole bunch of interesting companies around the world, and I can tell you that the one thing that keeps all these companies awake at night is digital disruption, the threat of digital disruption. What is digital disruption? Here's my definition for you. Digital disruption is the discontinuous change that occurs when new digital technologies and business models displace the value proposition of existing goods and services. And so if you think about digital disruption today, there's all kinds of surveys that are being made. There was a recent MIT survey where board members estimated that at least 30% of their current revenues were under threat from disruption. I do a lot of work with Dell Technologies. Dell EMC, there was a big merger last year. They carried out a survey globally with 4,000 respondents, just some of the industries that were represented. You see here automotive, insurance, financial services, media entertainment, healthcare. Here's what they found. 53% of those people they interviewed have experienced significant disruption in their industries in the last 2 years. But the figure that blew me away was this: 47% believe their industries will be unrecognizable just 3 years from now. Unrecognizable. And so if we think about a whole bunch of industries that have been transformed by digital disruption over the last, say, 15, 17, 20 years, it's pretty amazing. In fact, it's no wonder that over half of the Fortune 500 companies have disappeared from the list since the year 2000. Did you know that? Over half of the Fortune 500 have disappeared since. And you know what the principal reason is? Digital disruption. So we've seen this with the photographic industry, with the music industry. Think about movies and television now gone the way of streaming. We've seen it with the advertising industry that's trying to struggle in a world where people are no longer reading magazines or watching regular television shows, where everything's on demand or everything's mobile. The financial services industry, of course, where now we talk about digital wallets and cryptocurrencies and all kind of other stuff. The hotel and accommodation business, which literally everything's online, and now we're up against business models like Airbnb that nobody could have envisaged years ago. The telecommunications industry, I mean, how do you compete with free if you're in the telecoms industry? How do you compete with Skype and FaceTime and WhatsApp and all these other applications? We've seen this in the retail industry, in the media industry, in the automotive industry, and we're going to spend a few moments talking about those guys as well, and also in the manufacturing and the logistics industry, which is all going the way of the Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things, drone delivery, 3D printing, all this kind of stuff. And so clearly, digital disruption is coming our way. We don't always know exactly when it's going to hit. We don't always know exactly where it's going to come from, but we know it's coming. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? You know, Microsoft also ran a very interesting survey on digital transformation, and they asked a question that I thought was incredibly interesting. How long does your current business model have left to run? How long? So let's pick one industry, financial services. From the financial services industry, the respondents said, 46% of them said, less than 5 years. That's our current business model in financial services. How much time we have left? 14% said less than 2 years. And so I would argue that the only insurance policy we have against digital disruption is digital transformation. And of course, you've heard a lot about this over the last 3 days. But I find that when I talk to companies, the reaction is often a kind of a knee-jerk reaction. Okay, so, right, digital transformation, what are we going to do? To avoid disruption, we got to get more technology. We got to get more data. Was that all we need? More technology, more data? Let me take you back to arguably the most disruptive event in recent history, 9/11. And it brings back memories, of course, being here in New York City. But if you go back and you think about 9/11, big question that was asked right after and over the next few years was, could we have prevented that thing from happening? Could we have somehow prevented that amazing disruption that took place? That, by the way, disrupted everything, travel, all these other things that now we're still experiencing. Was it a lack of data? No, they had the data. They had the technology. They knew all about those particular individuals. These guys that came in and did this, they were already on a counter-terrorism watch list. Trouble was nobody was watching them. Nobody even sort of cared that they were in the country. Nobody cared that they were taking flying lessons here in the U.S. I mean, if you'd looked at the data, if you'd used the available technology at the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and the police force, you could have, basically we knew where they were. We knew what planes they were sitting on. We knew what seats they were sitting in. So it really wasn't a lack of technology, and it wasn't a lack of data. The 9/11 Commission concluded, after making their report, that there were 3 basic things that went wrong. Number one, it was a failure to seamlessly integrate the data of various government agencies. The CIA wasn't talking to the FBI, wasn't talking to the NSA, wasn't talking to the local police forces. None of those agencies were integrated in terms of technology and data. It was a failure to discover critical insights by joining the dots between the data. So it was out there, but nobody was kind of synthesizing that stuff in order to understand what was going on. And above all, this is the phrase that really struck me, it was a failure of imagination. Nobody could literally conceive that such a thing was possible. And I believe that there are powerful lessons for us in business today that we can take out of this. Again, number one, for me, the real digital challenge is not just getting more technology, but seamlessly integrating digital technologies and data across the entire business model. Number two, it's about joining the dots between the data in the search for important new strategic insights, new understandings. And number three, above all, it's about unleashing the power of imagination across our organizations in order to turn those insights into new disruptive innovations. Would you agree with me? So how do we do this? Remember the power of how? How do we unleash imagination across our organization so that we can conceive of almost inconceivable possibilities that are coming toward us? How can we drive not just digital transformation, because everybody's doing that. How can we drive digital innovation? Because it's only the innovation that will give us a competitive advantage. Because literally, if everyone's doing the same thing, then nobody gets ahead. Strategy is all about how do we do what no one else is doing. So it's really not just about transformation. It's about digital innovation. Now, I've spent years working in the innovation field. My latest book, The 4 Lenses of Innovation, really looked at how the mind of the innovator works. Because why? We're asking ourselves, where does disruptive innovation actually come from? How do the disruptive innovators that we think of come up with their breakthrough discoveries? So I went out and actually looked at hundreds and hundreds of cases of disruptive innovation over the last, say, 20 years. Literally went out and talked to some of these innovators. People like Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, who do a lot of work these days with Tesla, Howard Schultz of Starbucks, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. I can never tell those two guys apart. I can remember which one's which. They both look the same to me. Isn't it true? I defy you. Which one's which? But, by the way, for those ladies here present, I often get kind of criticized. You only got guys up on there in that picture. Well, what about some of those wonderful entrepreneurial ladies that we have that are disruptors, that have done incredible things? What is it inside the mind of the innovator that allows these individuals to discover opportunities that the rest of us couldn't see? And by the way, I then began to look back in time. Albert Einstein, how did he come up with the theory of special relativity when you're sitting in a tax office in Bern in Switzerland? Thomas Edison, how did he become a serial innovator? Henry Ford, the assembly line, how did he come up with that idea? And then even further back in history, to the Renaissance, guys like Galileo, Gutenberg, Leonardo da Vinci. Is there some way we can crack the code of how the mind of the innovator works? And what I discovered is, this is incredibly important, that if you can discover the particular thinking processes that innovators use, then maybe there's an opportunity to reverse engineer them. Maybe we can reverse engineer the mind of the innovator. Maybe we can turn those thinking processes into a set of tools, to a methodology. Remember the power of how? A methodology that will enable all of us to think like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos or Leonardo da Vinci. So what I discovered in my research was that all of those innovators did not come to their discoveries by sitting there staring out of the window waiting for a light bulb to go off above their heads. Eureka. They came to those discoveries by looking at the world from a fresh perspective. It was almost like they were using different lenses to look at situations, to look at problems, to look at industries. And by using those particular lenses, those angles of view, they were able to discover opportunities that were out there hidden in plain sight. I mean, they were literally out there because otherwise they wouldn't have been discoverable. But nobody else could see them. Why? They weren't using the lenses. So what are these lenses? The first is called challenging orthodoxies. It's about challenging conventional wisdom. If everyone is zigging, how do we zag? How do we do the opposite? How do we challenge the status quo? How do we turn industry convention on its head? That's the first lens of innovation. We find that most of those innovators are natural-born rebels, contrarians, people who think different, to use Steve Jobs' expression. The second lens of innovation is called harnessing trends. This is not about trying to necessarily predict the future with a crystal ball. It's more about having a wide-angle lens. It's about understanding all these various changes that are taking place around us in technologies, in demographics, in lifestyles, in all these areas. And saying, how do we harness the power of change and bring that into our business model to create new value for our customers? The third lens of innovation is leveraging resources in new ways. All of us have a set of core competencies in our organizations and strategic assets. These are resources that we usually use for certain things. The question here is, could we use those same resources for other things? Could we stretch our unique skills, our core competencies, and our strategic assets into new growth opportunities? And could we leverage other people's resources out there in the ecosystem, again, to be able to create new value for our customers? The fourth lens of innovation is called understanding needs. So this is kind of the holy grail of innovation. It's about getting under the skin of the customer, understanding the evolution of customer needs and customer demands, and somehow being able to look at your business from the customer's perspective, and then create solutions, design those solutions from the customer backward. These are the four lenses of innovation. And when you put them together, they become an incredibly powerful tool for bringing about transformation and change inside our organizations. Because instead of just saying to people, okay, we need you all to be digital innovators. We need you all to be digital disruptors, so off you go and disrupt. Well, that usually doesn't work, right? But if we can create intervention, if we can give people a methodology, a system to be able to do this, you would be amazed at the results. I've seen companies go from literally zero in terms of innovation to 3 years later producing maybe $400 or $500 million a year from their innovation capability simply by using the four lenses of innovation. So what those lenses do is they enable us to see these opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't see. Edward de Bono, you may remember from lateral thinking, the 6 thinking caps and all that. Edward said creativity involves breaking out of established patterns in order to look at things in a different way. I like this particular picture. I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at that. You see the world. You see the world the way you are, right? I mean, if you're a bank, you see the world like a bank. If you're a credit union, you see the world like a credit union. You know what I mean? And it's those orthodoxies that blind us to new opportunities. The success that comes with executing what we know and what we've historically always done is exactly what prevents us from seeing what's next. It blinds us. And that's why the first of these lenses is called challenging orthodoxies. How do we take off those blinkers? How do we open our minds to all kinds of new possibilities? So orthodoxies are these deeply held and broadly shared conventions about how things are supposed to be done in our industry. Let me ask you a question. How many of you remember the first ATMs? Now, don't raise your hand because it'll only show your age. Word of warning. But the ATM was kind of introduced in the UK around the mid-60s, and it took until the mid-70s and into the 80s for this thing to become widespread and ubiquitous in the United States. But when it was first launched, what was the reaction of the banks? You think people are going to trust those machines? You think we're going to trust those machines? Because it was challenging orthodoxies, right? Yet today, of course, these things are ubiquitous. You have, 30,000 ATMs? You can imagine the banking world working without ATMs and debit cards and credit cards and cashless payment. But notice what I said? You couldn't imagine the banking world working without those things. What do we have to do? We've got to unleash our imaginations. What was the problem with the CIA? It was a failure of imagination. We're going to imagine a time before those cards and those ATMs, when they disappear. It's already happening. You probably saw the announcement from Wells Fargo, cardless ATMs. Maybe cordless as well, that'll be an innovation. Cardless ATMs signal a shift in traditional banking. And it's not just Wells Fargo. We're now seeing this with Bank of America, with Chase. I have a client in Turkey called Yapı Kredi, a big bank in Turkey. They've already introduced basically a similar system where they send you a QR code on your phone and you use that to log in at the ATM. You don't need your card. Another one of my clients is called Safaricom. How many of you know Safaricom? Let's see a show of hands. Safaricom is a mobile phone service provider in Nairobi, Kenya. You may know them from a thing called M-Pesa. How many have heard of M-Pesa? So M-Pesa is a thing called mobile money, M-Pesa. And Safaricom, which is part of Vodafone, launched this thing in Kenya. Basically, it's a system whereby you can send money to other people or pay for things in stores and whatever, simply by sending an SMS. So it started out based on old technologies, just sending SMS. Let me show you what's happened with M-Pesa. It's now the world's largest mobile money network. Customers don't need a bank account to use M-Pesa, which is great because most of the people in Kenya don't even have a bank account. It's a way of life already for 30 million Africans now in 10 countries. It's used by more than 80% of all Kenyans. That's 18 million people. There are 6 billion transactions on this thing a year, and it's now used as a model for similar systems around the world. So how many of you have heard of SellerPay? So this is similarly, basically, the same kind of system where you can send, you can receive funds using not SMS, but nothing more than a person's email address or a phone number. Seller network banks processed over 170 million person-to-person payments in 2016, totaling $55 billion. So these are new ways of working. And what's interesting about Safaricom, by the way, is that one of my other clients in Kenya is Barclays Bank. Barclays Bank is shaking in their boots because now their major competitor is not another bank, it's a mobile phone company that 80% of Kenyans are using to do their transactions with. They don't even need bank accounts. Who needs Barclays? Safaricom has now transformed itself from a mobile phone company into a financial services company. So M-Shwari is another product. This is based on loans. It's not just about transactions, it's about loans. And so this is the real point here is you generally find that, it wasn't the banks that imagined all of these new possibilities in terms of digital payment. With banks, couldn't really imagine things like peer-to-peer lending, banking without banks. Couldn't really imagine something like crowdfunding, where if you're an entrepreneur, you don't go to a bank for a business loan, you just put it out there on social network and hope that other people are going to invest in you. Couldn't imagine these things. Couldn't imagine things like cryptocurrencies. You know how much Bitcoin is worth now? I don't know if you're following this, but just in terms of market cap, Bitcoin, which last May was worth $7 billion in terms of market cap, is now worth $27 billion in terms of market cap. We couldn't imagine some of these exchanges that would enable us to use these sort of Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies. None of that was imaginable. So the message here with this first lens of innovation is that we need to learn to look at things differently. And we've got to somehow enable all of our people across the entire organization to look at things differently, to question, to challenge the things that we've always done. Dee Hock, founder of Visa, once said, the problem is never how to get new, innovative thoughts into your mind. The real problem is how to get the old ones out. Because it's the old thinking that blinds us to these new opportunities. All of us tend to be sort of chained to these legacy ways of working. We're not literally chained, we're chained in the mind. And so that's why we often find that in any industry, it's the newcomers that present the biggest threat. Those who are able to see new ideas without any preconceptions. And that's why we find that most of the digital disruption doesn't come from the banks. It comes from these entrepreneurial startups that come into an industry and imagine new ways of doing things. So one of my first questions when I work with an organization is this one. What if you challenge your assumptions? Take all your assumptions, list them, and then reverse them, and see what kind of new opportunities that will open up. The second lens of innovation is harnessing trends. It's getting an understanding about all these things that are changing around the world. It's really, I use the eagle vision. It's about seeing the future in the present. Why? Because as Emily Greenbalk once said, the future will be influenced by trends that are now existent and observable. Everything you need to know can be known. It's already out there. We see some of these trends that are impacting particularly financial services at this time. And it's about what are we doing about those things? Are we harnessing those trends? You know, if we look at an industry like automotive, 4 trends, connected mobility, electric, autonomous, and ride-sharing, have revolutionized the automobile industry in the last 5 years. So I work a lot with Tesla. You know, what makes Tesla what it is? Clearly, the battery-powered car, that's one thing, but it's mostly because, and here's why they're in Silicon Valley, not in Detroit, it's a software-driven company. It's a digital-driven company. And also, you know, it's not just about electric and, you know, connected mobility and autonomous driving. It's also about ride-sharing. Now you can literally add your car, your Tesla, to the shared fleet, and while you're at work or while you're on vacation, somebody else is using your car, just like Uber, and you're earning money out of it. So they say at Tesla, in the near future, Teslas will drive themselves, charge themselves, and generate income by themselves. Question is, what are we doing about these implications? What are we doing about this in the financial services industry, generally? And, you know, one of the things is, when it used to be, you know, if you think about car loans and that kind of stuff, you would wait till someone was 18, and the first thing they do is they want to buy a car. And so they want a car loan, and then it will go on for the rest of their lives sometimes. You know, car loan, car loan, car loan. Well, now as we move to this model of the car, the auto as a service, you're not going to own it. You're not even going to rent it. You're just going to use it for what you want. So that kind of throws the whole car loan business model out of the window. I was talking recently to Liberty Mutual. They said, we can see our days are numbered. We need to start not insuring people, but insuring software and insuring vehicles. So it's really about seeing the future in the present. Where are these things going? I remember having a conversation with a guy at Philips back in 1993. He said, I don't believe in convergence. I don't really see that. You know, because if we put all those things together, you're just going to get a Frankenstein monster. It'll be a jack of all trades and a master of none. It won't be a very good computer. It won't be a very good camera. It won't be a very good music player. It won't be a very good phone. Well, how wrong could you be? You know, and so today we have this convergence going on of social and mobile and data analytics and robotics, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, cloud. All of this is coming together. And we want to make sure that we understand the implications of that. Larry Page says lots of companies don't succeed over time. What do they fundamentally do wrong? They usually miss the future. It's what happened to Blockbuster versus Netflix. Both of those companies are in the business of renting out physical DVDs. But then along comes the trend, and the trend is called streaming media. What are you going to do about it? Well, Netflix had to shift its entire business model from these physical warehouses and all these people sitting there processing orders and shipping out DVDs to, you know, a whole different business model based on digital. So he said it was really about putting on the brakes with DVDs and stepping on the gas with streaming, which has, you know, turned Netflix into one of the major streaming players. In the meantime, where's Blockbuster? They couldn't make the shift. I'm told that the last movie they ever rented out was called This Is the End. It's kind of appropriate. Here's what worries me. According to the Microsoft study, 46% of business decision makers think that their senior leaders are unwilling to disrupt their existing businesses in order to grow and compete more successfully in the future. Unwilling to challenge what we've always done. So we need to spend less time looking inward at what we currently do and backward at what we've always done, and spend more time looking outward at what's changing in the world and forward at the evolution of our industry. We need to get a grip on what are these incipient trends? What are the implications of new technology? Think about a thing like biometrics. What are we doing about it? We know that, for example, the global biometrics market will rise to $15 billion this year. Nearly 500 million people will be using a smartphone equipped with biometric technology by the end of this year. And so when I was in China in November, I was with China Merchant Bank. They're already using an ATM that uses biometric technology to recognize who you are. So you just come up and it recognizes your face. They're now taking that into their mobile phone app. So you can do your banking without any code, without anything else. They literally just recognize who you are. Now, I've already seen this with my other client in Turkey, Yapı Kredi, using iris recognition. So what are we doing about these technologies? I like to say that innovators are wave riders. They welcome change rather than trying to resist it. They've learned how to make change work for them rather than against them. And they've developed skills that enable them to turn discontinuity into opportunity. So my question for you is, are you up there riding these waves of change? Or are you laying on the beach waiting for the tsunami to come up and hit you? And I'm only half joking because you know tsunamis are very destructive. But I would argue that these industry tsunamis are just as destructive. So the tsunami for Kodak was digital photography. The tsunami for the music industry was initially iTunes and then Spotify and so on. The tsunami for the postal services around the world was email, SMS, instant messaging. The tsunami for BlackBerry, Nokia, and so on was the iPhone. The tsunami for the iPhone is Android, which is now on 85% of all mobile devices. The tsunami for the taxi industry was Uber. The tsunami for the hotel industry was Airbnb. Tsunami for the automotive industry is electric. So the question is, what will be the tsunami in your own industry? In my book, I like to ask, what will be the tsunami in your industry? How can we make sure we ride that wave instead of being washed away by it? So you need to ask, which wave are you riding? Which of these waves, these trends, are we riding into the future? Steve Jobs once said, these waves, you can see them way before they happen, and you just have to choose wisely which ones you're going to surf. The third lens of innovation is leveraging resources in new ways, looking at the company, looking at the world like a Lego kit of recombinant assets and competencies. Think about Google again. They started out as a search engine, but they were able to stretch into all kinds of incredible new opportunities, whether it's web search, speech recognition, object recognition, language translation, self-driving cars, and it goes on and on. Now Google is getting into ride sharing with Waze, into hotel booking to go up against the online travel agencies. They're making their own microchips. I don't know if you know this, but Larry Page has been working on a flying car for the last year or two in secret. Not so secret anymore. We now all know about it. Larry says, I always thought it was kind of stupid if you have this big company and you can only do like 5 things. So what else can we do with our resources? You know, this has been something that's been floating around for a few years. I'm sure if Google did do a bank, it wouldn't look like this. But we know that Google has been in and around financial services for some time already. We know that Facebook is making moves in that direction too. I mean, here's the thing. 2 billion people use Facebook. If they started financial services and only 10% of the clients or the users became clients, that's 200 million customers immediately. Amazon, again, basically moving in the same direction, and then we've got the big Apple, right? Accenture did a study, and they released this stuff in January. They said roughly 1 in 3 banking and insurance customers globally would consider switching their accounts to Google, Apple, Facebook, or Amazon if these Silicon Valley giants offered financial services. And by the way, 50% of millennials said the same thing. So they're stretching into these new opportunities, are we? How about your own resources? How could you leverage them in new ways? So I'd like you to ask yourself, what core competencies could we transfer to new opportunities? Could we exploit our strategic assets in new ways to bring new value to customers? That's what our people across our organizations need to be asking on a daily basis. And also not just our resources, but other people's. When Apple launched the iPod, they didn't do it on their own. They worked with a company called Portal Player Inc. to design the inside of the device. They worked with all the music companies to basically leverage their assets. They were the same with the iPhone. They worked with AT&T, with Singular, with Corning for the Gorilla Glass, with Foxconn in China to manufacture the thing. So it's leveraging other people's resources. You know, Tesla's got this amazing battery, right? Well, they didn't just invent a new battery from scratch. They basically put together thousands of Panasonic batteries, the same one you use in your consumer electronics appliances. And so now the Gigafactory in Nevada is part Tesla and part Panasonic. It's leveraging other people's resources. If you think about the digital car, it's really about shifting beyond the old traditional ecosystem, which was about the electronics and the tires and the windscreen and whatever, to a new ecosystem based around connected mobility and so on. It's making the shift from the old to the new and tapping into those resources that are out there in the external ecosystem. So we see the same thing, of course, now happening in fintech. leveraging all those resources that are now out there that can help you make the transformation. The fourth lens of innovation is understanding unmet needs. IBM put it beautifully in an ad they ran about 5-6 years ago. Stop selling what you have. Start selling what they need. They actually ran an even better campaign for financial services. Stop thinking like a bank. Start thinking like a customer. So it's thinking from the customer backward and designing solutions from the customer backward. Instead of just thinking, how do we apply this new technology, we want to be able to think from the customer back. How do we address this unmet need? How do we match those things? How do we bring together what is possible with what is needed? And we see great examples of this around the world. How many of you have seen this wonderful example from South Korea? This is a subway station in Seoul where people come down after working in Seoul all day long. They're about to get in the subway train, which you see the doors there opening. These are interactive panels along the wall where they can do their shopping before they get in the train. So they just take out the mobile phone, the cell phone, and they order what they want. They then get in the train, and when they get home, it's already being delivered to the door. They've had over 900,000 app downloads in less than a year. The most popular shopping app in South Korea, and Home Plus is now the country's #1 online retailer. In fact, they've moved this into other forms of retail, where stores don't need to have an inventory. They just need interactive panels. And people do the shopping. They don't need all the shopping bags. They just get it when they go home. I've even introduced this in all kinds of other places, including bus stops and whatever. So digital innovation is not about gadgets. It's about improving human experiences. You may have seen this thing from Amazon, where Amazon now launched early this year, Amazon Go, which is a physical grocery store with what they call just walk out technology, where you walk in and you scan your phone. When you're in the store, you just take all the products, and when you're done, you walk out, and that's it. You don't have to go to a cash register or anything. It's just literally no lines, no checkout, just walk out the door, as you've done in the past at Apple stores. So we're talking about digitally connected customers, and they have different needs, they have different demands, they have different expectations. And by the way, this also applies to senior citizens. We think it's all about millennials, right? And I think one of the complaints I have about financial services in general is that we've ignored senior citizens. We think they're not online. My father's 91. My mother's 86. You think they want to walk down to a bank branch, do things the old traditional way? They do everything online. So are we becoming solutionaries? Are we providing these kinds of solutions that people need? Innovation is about bringing together what's desirable with what's possible, with what's viable in the marketplace. Those are the four lenses of innovation. And if we look at all these great examples of innovation over the years, you'll find again and again that it's a combination of challenging orthodoxies, harnessing trends, leveraging resources, and understanding needs. Amazon, Google, Netflix, Uber, Airbnb, always the same story. It's about combining these things in order to create incredible new value. I'd like to stop at this point and show you a quick film about how you can bring all four lenses together and bring your message to your clients about the future possibilities of digital transformation. So can we show the film?
No. It's just construction. Yeah, that's all. No. I'm not driving.
Are you okay?
Yeah, you?
I'm good.
Oh, no, not you. Listen, I'm going to have to call my agent. I'm going to get right back to you.
Mr. Burton, this is InsureCorp. We've received sensor data that indicates you were in an accident. Are you injured in any way?
I'm not injured, no.
Is anyone else injured?
I don't believe so.
Okay, where's my agent's number?
We have pinpointed your location, and we are showing your car is not drivable. So we are dispatching an Uber car to take you to your destination.
That would be great.
I'm pressing 1. English. E-N-G-L-I, English.
May we give your coordinates to our appraiser drone to perform the appraisal?
Absolutely.
We have received the photos, assessed the damage, authorized the repair, selected a qualified repair facility, and have dispatched a tow truck to take your vehicle to that facility.
Perfect.
Yes, hi, this is... Yes. I'll hold.
We have looked up the other vehicle's insurance, transmitted the appropriate data to create the claim, and filed the California SR1 accident report. Can you confirm the information is correct on your phone, then hit the accept button?
I'll check it right now. Okay, all done.
Thank you. Your Uber car is arriving now.
I see it coming.
Accident, not payment. Accident.
Your tow truck should be there now. Don't forget to leave your keys in the vehicle. Thank you for using InsureCall, powered by Pivotal Labs.
Isn't that beautiful? Excellent. So I partner a lot today with Dell Technologies in terms of digital transformation. Those are the guys down in San Francisco called Pivotal Labs. Anybody heard of Pivotal Labs? They're working with some of the major banks here in the US. So I think that's a great example of how we can bring together those four lenses. Did you notice how that was challenging industry orthodoxies? It was harnessing the trends, technology trends and so on. It was leveraging resources in new ways, whether it's drones or Uber or whoever. And it was clearly understanding needs. And so that's what we need to do as organizations is find ways to apply those lenses to our business models in terms of who we sell to, what we provide, how we provide it, how we make money, what's our financial model, and how we differentiate. So what I'm saying again here is it's not just leaving it to chance. It's about how do we do this systematically and basically enable people across our organization to transform our organization digitally. So remember those two questions I asked earlier? How do we unleash imagination across our organizations? How do we drive not just digital transformation, but digital innovation? Well, what we do when we work with companies is we literally embed the mindset and the methodology of the four lenses across the entire organization. We train people in all kinds of places, in fact, the entire organization to use those lenses, to use those, those perspectives, but also to do it systematically. So we literally set up teams. We have teams that are challenging industry and company orthodoxies. We have teams that are looking out at the trends, the incipient trends, and saying, what are the implications? How do we harness these things? We have teams that are figuring out how we could leverage our own resources and other people's resources in new ways. And we have teams that are trying to understand these emerging needs, the pain points, the satisfaction gaps, and figuring out how do we address those things. We also implement software that enables people across the company to be able to manage these new insights and post ideas and so on, but also using what we call computer-aided innovation. So that we're using stuff like patent scanning, ecosystem mapping, data analytics, and so on to produce these new kinds of strategic insights that we can then use as the building blocks for big new ideas. We're also looking at physical spaces. So if you're going to create an innovation center, usually inside of an organization, it's not really an innovation center. It's a showroom to showcase our new offerings to clients. Here we're talking about spaces that are designed for people to challenge their thinking, to harness trends, to leverage resources. I mean, what are the core competencies in the strategic assets that we own? What are the resources available to us in the external ecosystem? How do we find out? Well, there's a place to go and do that, and a place to really get up and close and personal with customers and understand and address their needs. So really what all of this is about is making digital innovation less serendipitous and more systematic, less leaving it to chance and hoping somebody comes up with an idea in the shower or walking the dog, and more about ensuring that we put the conditions in place for luck to happen more often. It's about making it more systemic, not just systematic, but more systemic, meaning that we embed this across the entire organization as an enterprise capability, which brings together four components in the organization. Leadership. So digital-driven leadership. It's about putting structures in place to foster and support digital innovation. It's about using these processes like the four lenses and others and giving people enabling tools to be able to think in new ways across the company. It's also about engaging those people. Again, embedding the mindset and the methodology across the organization. And finally, about how do we make this a part of our daily culture, part of our values. And to do that, we're going to need, of course, a strategy. We're going to need metrics, all of that stuff. I mean, I've been working for 20 years with organizations to embed innovation and digital innovation as an enterprise capability. It's about embedding digital innovation into the DNA of our organizations, basically making it an all-the-time, everywhere capability, a new cultural mindset, a new corporate way of life. That's all the time I have. I've got 7 seconds left. In fact, it's going up. I've got 10 seconds, 11 seconds. No, it's gone back to 0. The rest is in the book. I'd like to leave you one statement from Steve Jobs. I think it's absolutely pertinent. He said, innovation's the only way to win. I would argue that in a transformation economy, digital innovation is the only way to win. Thank you very much.
I have a couple questions for you if you join me. I have a few questions for you if you join me.
Let's stay.
You're not off the hook just
I'm not
yet.
off the hook yet.
Okay, well, let's come over here.
Okay.
And I'm going to position you so that the cameras, this is well rehearsed, believe me,
Sure.
very well rehearsed too.
Okay.
So the cameras and everyone can see you. Amazing. First of all, amazing. Thank you so much. Amazing. Really, really amazing. Before I get to what they wanted me to ask you, I have a couple questions for you. There seems to be a point where the kind of change and innovation you're talking about, some of the roadblocks, it seems to kind of run into human nature.
Oh, yeah.
And there's at some point where people don't believe it's possible for them to do that, and that seems to be the point where we have to be able to move through. Let's elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, there are tremendous amount of roadblocks inside of an organization. And you mentioned yourself, it's about humans. All we have in an organization basically is human beings. And human beings, since the beginning of time, our brains are set up for what we call linear thinking. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. But the world is now non-linear. Linear thinking is useless in a non-linear world, right? It's a world of discontinuous change, not continuous change. And so we have to, as I said, intervene. We have to introduce a new mindset. And part of what I've done today is to show some examples of what's possible. And I think when people see what's possible, like you go back to the Wright brothers. Before the Wright brothers, everyone said it's impossible. Nobody could fly. If God wanted us to fly, he would have given us wings, right? It's impossible. But the minute they took off, everyone was like, okay, how do we build a better airplane? How do we make it faster? How do we make it fly higher? Because it was now possible. It's like the reason we all walk as human beings is because when we're little babies, we see other people walking around us. We go, oh, it must be possible, right? All we got to do is learn that. And so really that's what it's very much about. Getting over those human roadblocks is demonstrating that it's possible and getting people to think along new lines.
Very well put. What are your top 3 must-dos for breakthrough innovation success?
I'll give you 4. Challenge orthodoxies, harness strength. No, I mean, clearly you need to, I think as I showed later, it's not about doing this once. Once in a blue moon and then nothing. It's about doing this continuously. How do we continuously produce breakthrough innovations, disruptive innovations? And I think I'd go back to my 4 components that I showed right at the end there. It's about how do we embed this in leadership so that it's driven from the top, leadership and structure, management structure around it. How do we, embed the right systematic processes and give people the right tools? How do we engage people, train people, build it into their incentives and so on? And how do we create the mechanisms that will embed this in the culture so that it's an everyday thing? It's not rhetoric, it's reality. So those are must-haves. If you don't do those things, if part of the system is missing, none of it will work. It's like a car engine. I'm going to go back to the old days when we had combustion engines. Remember that? You can have 50% or 80% or 90% of an engine, but if you take out 10% of the components, it won't work. So it's really about getting the entire system in place in order to enable continuous innovation.
I don't want to say to try to move towards what you're discussing, because this is evolution. This is happening regardless. But it's hard to measure. The return on investment of innovation is hard to measure. How could that be done better? Because I think that's what's sometimes hard for people and corporations to grasp.
It's a very good point. And Harvard Business Review published an article about this about a year ago, which I think was absolutely brilliant, where they said there are kind of 3 levels of innovation normally. We innovate around the core business. we innovate in adjacencies, so these new kind of opportunities, and then we innovate in transformational stuff. And when we begin to allocate resources to those three levels of innovation, guess where most of the money goes? Improving the core business, right? So we tend to find that sort of 60, 70% of the investment is making incremental improvements to what we are already doing. And then we have maybe 20%, 25% in perhaps, adjacent opportunities, and maybe 5% or even 2% in transformational stuff. But they said the return on investment, to come back to your point, is that whole story flipped on its head. The biggest return on investment, like 60, 70, 80%, tends to come from the transformational stuff. The adjacencies produce, 25, 30% of return on investment. And it's the incremental stuff where we put most of our money, that's only going to give us about 2 to 5% return on investment. So we want to think about how we're spending our money and where we expect most of the return to come from.
And what we're measuring, that was a great point, what we're measuring when we try to
So
measure
we're
this.
measuring the amount of money and time and resources, and we're measuring the actual return in terms of new revenues and so on that are delivered to the company.